Behind me is a 1969 model Ford Mustang. So this car we've got here to do some gauges. We've got a 4 individual gauges to install into this car. One of them is a speedo, has its own transducer that attaches to the original location that your cable driven speedo would normally connect to. We have a tacho, we have a fuel gauge, we have temperature there as a pair, and we have oil pressure, and we also have a voltage meter. So I'm going to run you guys through the process of installing those products, the wiring for the dashboard, the process for getting that gauge cluster installed into the car. While the dashboard's apart, we've got a replacement speaker to go into it. Up in the top factory location of the dashboard. We have a retro style radio unit that will go into the car as well. It is an AM FM radio, it has Bluetooth, USB and auxiliary inputs. At the same time, we'll also then have a new pair of speakers. Those speakers are going to be installed into the kick panels in the car, and we're going to install those into those kick panels using a method of fiberglassing. There'll be a separate video which is a series of steps for making those fiberglass molds. This video will give you an overview of that, and I'll have a link in the description to the second video with a bit more detail on those fiberglass pods. The final step in that puzzle is the parking brake relocated. And by relocated, I mean it's going to go electric. So we're going to use a product called an e-STOPP. The e-STOPP is an electric solenoid that will pull on the factory manual handbrake cable with just a press button on, press button off, and that'll do away with all of our manual foot operated pedal, giving us a little bit more clearance for the speaker in that driver's side. Righto guys, so we're starting out with a pretty standard looking dashboard. It's got analog gauges in it. I'd already started pulling this apart before I started shooting, so bear with me. So here we have it. This is the oil pressure gauge. The old one looks like that. Old school mechanical electronic gauge. This is our new digital gauge, which is done up of a circuit board and a lens. Goes in the metal housing at the back, like so. Then it'll sit in behind this. And then you've got a few things that just bolt together to put it all as one piece, or put it back together. So there it is. That's the full digital dash conversion. It looks slick as. Stealthy, black tinted. That's hot. That is hot. You know, we had old stuff like this before. All this. Once we've built the dashboard and put all of those lenses and those circuit boards together, we've got to wire them up. To run all the wiring out, you can see here that it all comes through the holes, the factory holes. It's all tubed and taped. It's got a plug on the end of it, so it's ready to be accepted into the car once it goes in. The last step in that process is to put all of that wiring in the car onto plugs, so that our new wiring, our new plugs, will be accepted and marry up correctly. So this is just the process of crimping on the terminals, putting all those plugs together, matching it up onto the gauge cluster. And once you've got it matched up onto the gauge cluster, guys, it plugs together. You can see I left the labels on it just to make it easy to fault find. We then changed over to the transducer from the speedo cable that used to be in place. We've got to run that cable up away from the exhaust, tube it, follow up the factory wiring, run it into the car, and then replace the other sensors. So the oil pressure sensor and also the water temperature sensor need a replacement. Now, interestingly enough, when this product was supplied to us from Intellitronix in the USA. They supplied it with a single wire temperature, which you can see started at 186 degrees. This is Celsius, and as it heats up, it's actually dropping in temperature rather than increasing. So we're a bit confused by this when we got it all. I actually had it in the car. You can see it bottoms out at 999. Eventually, once we got that sorted, turns out it needed a 2-wire sensor rather than a single wire sensor, and we installed it later on, and now the temperature works properly. So the final thing that we needed to do with this, guys, was road test it, make sure that the speedo calibration was working with that new transducer. All good. The next steps were fiberglassing. So we start out with some masking tape to protect what we need to take a mold of. You'll see me start drawing lines on this. This is just to give us a bit of a guideline as to where we need to go as far as our cutouts are concerned once we've got this dry. We use cardboard and masking tape to protect other surfaces in the car, obviously plastic wrap, that sort of stuff. We apply the resin onto that tape directly and then apply the matting onto that resin, and that gives us our base mold that you'll see here in just a sec. Once we've got that base mold, it has the tape now stuck to it, so we get the tape stripped off. That is our completed basic mold of these kick panels. Basically that will come back now to be cut along the little drawn edge that's on the bottom there. And it looks rough as guts at the moment, but by the time it is cut, reshaped, and a face will go onto this as well, you'll see how these come together as a full kick panel. So the tape's all stripped off now. We've got to cut these molds to shape. Use an air hacksaw or an air saw to do that. Test them back in against the car, make some adjustments, obviously mark out some high points, just try to get it all nice and straight. And once we've got that cleaned up, we use the grinder just to get some flat surfaces going. After that, we need to cut out our next steps using jigsaw. You could use a router, jigsaw, whatever. In this case I use a jigsaw because it's just as easy. We cut out the basic shape for these speaker mounts, one, and then replicate it the other side so that they're as close to the same as we can get them. You could have done this a few different ways, guys. We chose to do it like this because we weren't intervening with anything in the back side of the car. We were leaving the factory vents in place, we were leaving the factory kick panels in place, and we literally just wanted these to sit on the front. It's a convertible at the end of the day. To try and get good sound quality out of it, or I should say above average sound quality out of it while driving, was always going to be a little bit of a hassle or a little bit tight. Our fiberglassing process I covered off in a little bit more detail in our other video I mentioned at the start, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here, but basically we're just putting that top layer together onto these fiberglass pods so that they form like a box or a solid mounting which we can screw our speakers into when we get finished. So we trim them up, same process as the back side, just get all the excess cut back now, the overlap, get all of it cleaned up, grey and flat. Basically make it as simple as possible so that it's going to sit in the right spot inside of the car when we get it in there. That's the back side of the dashboard, and you can see whenever this has been fitted, it's just essentially been elasticed or glued in here. So we rip that out, we can see we've got 4 posts. I've got the replacement speaker that's going in, which is this custom auto sound 5x7. This is a dual voice coil, so basically what's happening is it's wired up for left and right, but all in one speaker, and that's going to go in place here. I've wired that to a 4-pin plug, which you can see there, and back over here in the car I've got the corresponding 4-pin plug, so that you're going to see plug in, and then the dashboard will go back in. So for this next bit, guys, we're putting the dash back in the car, so that whole dash pad comes out of the car. We've got the speaker mounted in it that I showed you. There's a few screws, bolts, nuts and pieces. You can see here in the background I was obviously doing this early morning because night becomes day. It all goes back together, so it's like it was never out in the first place. Last step in this process was to do the e-stop, the electric handbrake. You can see there we made up a mounting plate. We had to supply some aftermarket handbrake cables and make up a bunch of brackets just to try and get it all up in underneath there. Very hard car to work with in this case because very small amount of room, but we tried to replicate the factory stuff and use the factory brackets as much as possible. The e-stop is operated with this press button, so it flashes while it's engaging, and then it does the same thing when it disengages as well. That module, you can see it mounts under. We made a cover plate up for the linkages, and that's it there in its entirety underneath the car. Last thing we did was we added a chrome alternator, 140 amp alternator to the system because it was a bit down on voltage when under load. So that's it, guys, in its entirety, the Mustang build. So just as a recap, we had a few things happen with this car that were very unexpected. It probably did take a little bit longer than I would have liked it to have, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. Because we had the car here for so long and moving it in and out of the little workshop here in the back of the house, the spark plugs fouled up. Because the car wasn't getting driven very far, it wasn't getting warmed up properly. It's obviously running a little bit rich. So we got some new plugs, threw the plugs in, and 7 of the 8 plugs came out. They were very tight, but they did come out eventually, and one of them snapped off. It just completely broke off in the head. Yeah, essentially it left the thread behind inside the head. So we had a few weeks delay in waiting for guys that we could get to assist to pull that out, pull it apart. Fortunately, we managed to get that back out without actually having to remove the motor, which was looking like it was going to be the case for a little while. Big shout out to my good friend Matt down at Canberra Exhaust and Tow Bar Fitters, who helped me out exponentially. And now that's all back together, 8 plugs back in it, it runs beautifully. So great project. Big thanks to David, the owner of that car, for entrusting us with the project. Again, a few different ways that it could have gone, a few different outcomes. We were looking for a nice, clean and simple job that basically got as many of those upgrades into the car as we could possibly get, without necessarily inflicting too much obvious change, is probably the way I would describe it. So thanks for watching, guys. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel here, Can Fit Automotive Accessories. If you haven't seen it either, we have a secondary channel that's going to run in tandem with this one, which is called the Can Fit Collective. That's a channel that I'm running with a very good friend of mine, Brett. We're going to be working on this Lexus here behind me as a bit of a joint project, and we're also going to be doing some interviews and some chats with some pretty cool people as well. So you guys keep across that, and until next time, I will see you later.